Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction. I had a commenter mention several series that I'd left out of my earlier animated 80s videos, and upon closer inspection, found that they were all shows that were aired in Japan. That made me realize that I love 80s cartoons, and I love anime, but I never stopped to think about what kids in Japan were watching while I was watching all those great series that I love. I guess it's human nature to talk about what you know, and so I didn't mention any of these in the other videos. But as this is a global platform, I thought I'd try my best to do something similar to what I've done for US shows for those Japanese shows as well. Big disclaimer here though, I'm obviously not Japanese, and I definitely don't speak Japanese or read and write kanji, hiragana, or katakana. Languages are definitely not my area of expertise. In fact, I can only hope that I pronounce those right, and to that end I'll be referring to each series in this video by their English titles so as to not butcher them in Japanese. However, I am a fairly competent researcher, and I do find the opportunity to compare what I was watching here in America to what my Japanese contemporaries were watching interesting, so I'm going to give this a shot. If you like 80s cartoons in all of their forms and regardless of the point of origin, like and subscribe, and leave a comment on this video to let me know what you think. Also, make sure to check out the companion playlist for this video that has the intros from each of these shows. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get started with the Animated 80s, Japan edition. The same way I started here in the US, in 1980.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
So unlike my US version of this series where I covered everything on the air in 1980 and then shifted to premieres, I'm only going to look at the premieres in this edition. And that's because Japan had a pretty massive 28 releases in 1980 compared to America's 24 shows total that were on the air that year. If I covered the series that were already on the air going into 1980 in Japan, it would increase that count by another 23. I'll list those out here as a point of reference, but I won't go into any real detail. If this edition of the series is popular, then who knows, I may take a look at the 70s at some point in the future. So here's a rapid-fire look at what was already on the air. But what did 1980 look like for new releases to usher in the new decade? Let's take a look. Best as I can tell in my research, the 1980 lineup of cartoons in Japan came in a couple of specific types. There were several slice-of-life series, some classic story-based shows, a couple of hijinks-filled comedies, lots of action, and even more robot and mecha action. So let's take a look at each of the categories, and while we're there, we'll compare them each to the US counterparts as well. I'm going to start off with all of the series from this year that were based on classical literature or theater, or otherwise educational in nature. This group includes The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, King Arthur, Prince on a White Horse, Zukoke Knight, Don de la Mancha, The Wonderful Adventures of Nils, Maeterlinck's Bluebird, Tittle and Middle's Adventurous Journey, Manga Proverb Encyclopedia, and Kira Nishita no Calendar. I hope I said some of those right at least. Tom Sawyer was based on the 1876 American novel by Mark Twain and was released as part of the World Masterpiece Theater series, which focused on a different piece of Western literature each season. King Arthur, Prince on a White Horse was technically based on Arthurian legend and a sequel to an earlier, more faithful King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table series, but with a science fiction twist. We'll look at this one more in the action section. Zukoke Knight, Don de la Mancha was based on Miguel de Cervantes' character Don Quixote from his 1605 epic novel and followed the comedic adventures of an inept knight and his squire. The The Wonderful Adventure of Nils is an adaptation of a 1906 Swedish novel by Selma Lagerlöf about a shrunken boy and a domestic goose joining a migrating flock of wild geese and traveling the country. And lastly, Tittle and Middle's Adventurous Journey adapts a 1908 story by a Belgian playwright named Maurice Maeterlinck about a pair of children searching for the manifestation of happiness under the guidance of a fairy, and accompanied by their anthropomorphized pets. The last two shows in this group, Manga Proverb Encyclopedia and Kira Nishida no Calendar, are both educational series, with the first comprised of short stories focused on teaching morals and life lessons, and the second centered on Japanese history. Frankly, the closest thing we had to any of these shows in America in 1980 were Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle, which was based on the Edgar Rice Burroughs character from 1912, or The Lone Ranger, based on the 1933 radio character. Oh, and we also had Schoolhouse Rocks for some bite-sized education as well. The next category that I wanted to go through was comprised of all the slice-of-life and coming-of-age type shows from that year, genres that America just didn't really have anything similar to in 1980. Sanpei the Fisherman follows the exploits of a young rural fisherman named Mihira Sanpei as he goes about his life in his small wooded village. He's a fishing prodigy who enters various fishing challenges and competitions, making friends and rivals and learning lessons on his quest to become the best fisherman. Sue Cat was about an amnesiac cat who wanted to be the world's greatest singer and followed her adventures trying to reach that goal. This is a story format that seems to be used quite often in Japan, but that we'd never really adopt in America for some reason. The be the best story, that is. We use the amnesia one all the time. Hoiro.
Okay, don't hurt yourself.
Horo Bun Bun is the story of an abandoned puppy, the title character Bun Bun, and his stray dog mentor Big, as he learns to survive in the mysterious and sometimes scary world he finds himself in. America had plenty of anthropomorphic animals at the time, but none that told the fish out of water story. The Little Bits is essentially the Smurfs, which would air in the US the following year, but without a Gargamel-type villain. It focused on the characters' day-to-day lives and teaching lessons and morals with each episode. We'd eventually get this series here on Nick Jr. in the early 90s. The Monchichi Twins was a series based on the popular Japanese toy line from the 70s, and each episode was a self-contained story as the twins lived out various fantasies like traveling to space. We'd definitely get similar types of stories here over the next several years. We also got our own version of the Monchichis in 1983, but it was quite a bit different than this one. And finally, in 1980, Japan got Lalabelle the Magical Girl, which was the adventure of a girl from a magical world chasing a thief through a portal to Earth, and her journey to become familiar with life in this world while still trying to stop the thief Biscus from making trouble. We had shows that covered similar ground, but this series told more complex stories than most of what we got in the West. The comedy category is one in which we in America definitely got more entries. In fact, most of what we had on the air here in 1980, if not completely comedic, had a strong comedic element to it. In Japan, though, there were two series that specifically focused on generating laughs. Gonbe follows the antics of a monkey born and raised in the mountainous countryside who moves to Tokyo and gets a job at the zoo. He makes a couple of new friends, Santaro and Benkei, and they proceed to get up to all sorts of hijinks. The other comedy series Japan had in 1980 was Ojamanga Yamada-kun, which was based on a manga of the same name by Hisachi Ishii. Each episode of the series consisted of 3 7-minute skits that followed the characters through various humorous scenarios. Both of these probably would have fit right into the 1980 US lineup and format, if not localization. And that brings us to the first of two categories that fit the structure of this channel: action. There were several action-driven shows that premiered in Japan this year, including Ashita no Joe 2, Genki the Boy Champ, Mute King the Dashing Warrior, Rescue Man, The Monster Kid, Space Battleship Yamato 3, and the aforementioned King Arthur Prince on a White Horse. Ashita no Joe 2 and Genki the Boy Champ were both sports series set in the world of boxing, with each telling a variation on the Be the Best formula. We definitely had our share of sports-themed cartoons over the years here in the US, both before and after the 1980s, but I don't think any of them specifically focused on boxing. Japan also had a couple of superhero shows this year in the form of Mute King, the Dashing Warrior, and Rescue Man. Mute King is the story of a 12-year-old boy named Rin Yuki who gains the power to become the mighty hero Mute King and defend the world from shape-changing aliens with the help of Takoro, a deputy from another world. This one shares some similarities with Shazam, which is also about a kid who becomes an adult superhero. We'd get a cartoon version of that character in America next year. In Rescue Man, which is the fourth entry into the ongoing Time Boken franchise, 3 criminals join the Time Patrol, and posing as members work to enact their nefarious schemes. However, 2 other members of the Time Patrol have caught on to them and work behind the scenes to stop them. We didn't have an exact analog at the time, but the story and structure are very familiar to American cartoon fans. Monster Kid was about a young boy named Kaibutsu-kun, the eponymous Monster Kid, and his friends Dracula, Wolfman, and Frankenstein traveling from the monster world to Earth to battle the evil monsters of Demonish. We also had a Dracula, Wolfman, and Frankenstein series here in 1980 called Drac Pack. Space Battleship Yamato 3 was the 3rd season of what we in America came to know as Star Blazers, and told the Baelor War Saga. And lastly, there was King Arthur, Prince on a White Horse, which I said earlier we'd be talking about here. This series took the Arthurian legend and transplanted it to the future, where Arthur and his companions battled the evil Z-King. In a lot of ways, this one reminds me of one of my personal favorite 90s cartoons we had in America called King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. So that brings us to the last category I mentioned, robots and mecha. And wow, did Japan have plenty of these. The list includes Astro Boy, Invincible Robo Trider G7, Moby Dick 5, Shin Tetsujin 28, Space Emperor God Sigma, Space Runaway Ideon, and Space Warrior Baldios. That's 7 of the 28 shows I've covered in this video, or 25%. We only had a couple of similar shows in the US that year, and all of those were adaptations of older Japanese cartoons anyway. In Japan, though, there was a new version of Osamu Tezuka's classic character Astro Boy, which followed the young robot on a series of all-new adventures. Shin Tetsujin 28 was another new version of a classic manga character, the giant robot Tetsujin 28. Americans got both the original 1963 versions of Astro Boy and Tetsujin 28, which was called Gigantor here, at almost the same time as the Japanese airings. Both of these new versions would take longer to come here, though. We'd get a dubbed version of the newer Astro Boy series in the US in 1986, and the newer Tetsujin 28 would be retitled to The New Adventures of Gigantor and aired on the Sci-Fi Channel here in the US in 1993. The Moby Dick 5 was an interesting concept based on a war between the lost nation of Atlantis and another called Mu. Atlantis would transport itself to the future after being defeated in an attempt to conquer the modern world, but Mu sent a team of 5 operatives and a giant white whale robot to stop them. The whale was a unique take on robots, and the show looked pretty cool, but it seems to mostly be lost now. The last 4 in this category, including Invincible Robo Trider G7, Space Emperor God Sigma, Space Runaway Ideon, and Space Warrior Baldios, were all members of the giant mecha or gestalt genre. Trider G7 is about a 6th grader who not only runs a company, but pilots the series' namesake giant robot against alien invaders. God Sigma is about 3 young people who pilot the components of the giant God Sigma robot to defend Earth and attempt to retake Jupiter's moon Io from the invading Eldar aliens. Ideon is about 3 young people piloting tanks which merge to become the powerful giant robot Ideon, which they use to defend the survivors of a human colony called Solo against the invading aliens of the Buff Clan. Baldios is about a young man named Marin Raygun who is accidentally warped to the future and joins the fight against a villain from his past who killed his father. Marin becomes a pilot with the Resistance military Blue Fixer and takes command of one of the ships that forms the giant robot Baldios as they fight against the armies of the evil Zeo Getler. Like I said, we had some shows like this in 1980, but they were all dubbed versions of Dino Mecha Gaiking, Planetary Robot Vanguard Ace, Getter Robo G, UFO Robot Grandizer, and Sci-Fi West Sage Starzinger, which all originally aired in Japan between 1975 and 1978. And that's it. Everything that premiered in Japan in 1980. These shows differed pretty wildly from what we got here in the US, not only in genre and format, but in storytelling and tone as well. A lot of the Japanese programming on this list was either darker or more mature than anything we had at the same time in America, usually containing much more graphic violence, more serious consequences like death, and even occasional nudity or profanity that would never have flown on American networks. Not only that, but Japanese animation techniques also leaned toward a more hyper-stylized art that was more reminiscent of American comic books, whereas American cartoons either employed a super cartoony style like the characters in Scooby-Doo and the Drac Pack, or the serialized realism of Thundar and the Super 7 shows. Fortunately, though, we'd see more and more influence from the animation of Japan in American shows as the decade moved on. Pound for pound, though, Japan definitely had at least as good a lineup in 1980 as we had over here, if not better. And with that, I'll bring this first episode of the Animated 80s Japan edition to a close. I can't tell all of you where you can watch these series currently, so I'll have to leave that up to you, but I do have all the intros put together into a playlist for you. Check that out and let me know what you think of it in the episode in the comments. I hope that I did a decent job of capturing everything that Japan had to offer for animation in 1980, and that all of it was well represented. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback. Thanks for watching, and if this video is popular, I'll probably continue through the decade. Stay tuned to see, and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.